Hello Earthlings, Neutron Sound here. Album review time has reared its head once again. Today I'm going to be examining the new Cavern of Antimatter album, Void Beats Invocation Trex. Cavern of Antimatter is led by Tim Gane from Stereolab, which would probably explain the band name and album title. And the lineup is rounded out by Joe Dilworth, who played drums on the first Stereolab album before Andy Ramsey joined and they got famous, as well as German keyboardist Holger Zapf, because this is a krautrock band, and you can't have a krautrock band without a kraut. Of all these Stereolab side projects I've listened to, like the High Llamas and Schema, and Monad and Laetitia Sadier's solo career, this is probably the closest anyone has got to sounding exactly like Stereolab. I mean, after all, they've got the main musical genius of the band on guitar. So let's get to the music. The opening track is TARDIS Symbols. It's the poppiest pop culture reference Tim has made since he quoted Dancing Queen by ABBA in the middle of the free design. As its name suggests, it opens right away with some cymbals, and then a drum machine and an echoing synth bass line in 7/8. This track reminds me a lot of Jenny Onduline, one open chord that basically goes through the length of the track, and then all these other textural sounds fly in and out over this steady groove. Although there are some sort of melodic guitar chords halfway through that give it a bit of harmonic shape as well as a bit of a melody. And then there's a slightly different bass line in the guitar that comes in about 3/4 of the way through, which is 9 minutes in because this is the longest track on the album. And then the track ends with about 30 seconds of electronic effects. Track 2 is Blowing My Nose Under Close Observation. I didn't write these titles. It's got a dual synth bass line, with each synth slightly panned, giving it a sort of Margarine Eclipse feel. One of the bass lines goes up high in one of the sections, I like that. And neither really changes rhythm. They change notes sometimes, but never rhythm, which is just one example of Tim Gane's geometric approach to composition. Insect Fear has a really Mixolydian riff, with some audible live drums in the mix. At one point a guitar comes in and it sounds almost exactly like the guitar on The Noise of Carpet by Stereolab. And there's some pinball-like electronic percussion on the track. There's a bit of a weird atonal bass line near the end, although not as weird as one of the bass lines to come. Melody and high feedback tones is about as Stereolab as you get. I was waiting at one point for Laetitia's voice to come in, and possibly Mary's as well. It's got your typical late 90s Stereolab motoric beat. It's got your retro synth tone. Basically everything about it is Stereolab apart from the lack of vocals. Hi-hats Bring the Hiss, on the other hand, is almost pure drum and bass. It's got a really funky sort of atonal bass line. It's got an oscillating two-note guitar line in a half step, which basically becomes the other main motive of the song. In the middle, he brings in some short echo feedback on the drums, along with some organ, like a Hammond organ, as opposed to his usual Vox organ or Farfisa. There's a much more sparse bass line at the end where the echo drums come in. I like how Tim is kind of going in a new direction with this song. However, Liquid Gate has a much more classic Stereolab sound. It's also a bit of a Deer Hunter sound because Bradford Cox is singing on it. I think you know how I feel about Bradford Cox because I literally took my surname from his solo project, Atlas Sound. And Liquid Gate does sound like something that could have ended up on Fading Frontier. Tim was actually on Fading Frontier, as you saw in my review, if you watched it. I guess we all know that Brad's voice really goes well with Tim's music. I mean, he's a big Stereolab fan, so yeah, it just really works. And then Pantechnicon sounds a bit like they're aping Daft Punk, because you've got a sort of epic, brassy synth and a string synth at the beginning. And then also the fact that there's a new guitar melody and a new synth melody that come in on the second part of the song. It's also quite a Daft Punk sounding thing. Black Glass Actions is another favorite of mine. It's got Jan St. Werner from Mouse on Mars contributing to it. It's got some great chords over just a steady bum 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 synth. And there's some nice blend between the guitar and the synth. Again, great chords. Yeah, that's about all there is to say about it. Then Planetary Folklore has Sonic Boom delivering a weird sort of quasi-prophetic, sort of Orwellian style monologue. If he sang it in French, it would fit right in. Or at least if he sang it with a French accent. Although it's maybe a bit more apocalyptic than Letitia normally gets. Musically, it's quite similar to TARDIS Symbols. It's got a lot of the same elements, like the cymbals and the short echoes and the 7/8 bass line. I think the lyrics are basically about how art itself, not artists, but art itself will cause a revolution and take over the world. It's sort of, like I said, Orwellian, Bradburian, Vonnegut-like, futuristic, dystopian thing? I don't know. It's quite weird. Echolalia uses the same formula as a lot of tracks on the album, where there's a drum machine, although here it's a 4 on the floor beat, and then you've got a synth bass line, mostly roots and fifths, and then the guitar and synth play a melody harmonized in chords, which gives it harmonic shape, and it's quite Stereolab-y. Voidbeat is the last long track on the album. It starts with some echoing synth arpeggios with a really good chord progression. Then you've got a new sparse line which enters with the drums about 2 minutes in, and then it reverts back to the original line, but not before a less harmonically active echoing synth line comes in. And then even later, a really static echoing synth line comes in. And just before the end, everything's gone but that echoing synth line, which almost turns into a drone, but the groove comes back just as it ends. And then the closer, Zone Null, is a really good closer. It's got a music box on it, and a piano, which kind of work together. Some nice strings in the background, some nice guitar playing, and yeah, it's a really good closer. So, as a Stereolab fan, I of course like this album, and I'm sure Cavern of Antimatter have a really good future ahead of them. I mean, as long as Tim keeps on doing what he does, I'm bound to like most of it. So yeah, this is a great album, and it really shows how Tim was the musical genius of Stereolab as much as Letitia's solo stuff and Monad show how she was the lyrical genius of Stereolab. And then the High Llamas shows Sean O'Hagan's genius, and Snow Pony shows that Catherine Gifford can sing alright. And then Schema, to a certain extent, showed off Mary Hanson's vocal ability, although not as much as Stereolab. But again, like I said at the beginning, Cavern of Antimatter are probably the closest a Stereolab side project has come to the essence of the group. Next week I will be reviewing Animal Collective's album Painting With, so stay tuned for that. This is Neutron Sound signing off. Go forth and be awesome.